Right, I feel a bit of a fraud standing up here because out of all of the previous speakers, they're all scientists or doing scientific training. I was originally a biologist, but for the last 25 years, I wouldn't call myself a fisheries scientist. I'm much more of a fishery manager. And I really want to talk about salmon as an ecosystem indicator species. What are they telling us, and why does it matter? Katrina, I could really do with your results. I'm really looking forward to hearing that work that's coming forward. But it's really, why are salmon important? And it's because of this life cycle. They're born in the headwaters of our streams and rivers. They're going out down our main stems, going out through the rivers, into the estuaries, and then out on a huge oceanic journey. And this life cycle is great. It's nice and simple in certain respects, but it also covers a multitude of sins. Because as we've seen today, the migratory pathways of fish, when they get out there, are huge and they're extensive. This is an early distribution of salmon as they're moving through sea. It needs to be updated. But as the fish move through this environment, they're picking up signals and pressures from a whole range of the different suspects. And I think I challenged you yesterday in the panel discussions. If I asked you all to name your top 5 pressures on salmon, or what are these suspects, you'd all give me a different opinion. So I've decided to give you mine. And these are my personal ones. They range from industry, exploitation, pelagic, aquaculture, food availability, predators, parasites and diseases, obstacles to fish migration, water quality and quantity. And these are all the pressures, and there's hundreds more as the fish migrates down a river, what it's experiencing through its life, and how it goes out to sea and what it picks up. All of these pressures are impacting on our fish, and they're all amplified by climate change. We know the world is getting warmer. We know that it's easy to talk about average figures. I used to manage the River Dee in Aberdeenshire in northeast Scotland, and that's increased, the average temperature of the Dee has increased by 2 degrees centigrade over the course of the last 30 years. And that's the average temperature. The peaks and the troughs have got much higher. It's northeast Scotland. It's famous for being cold and wet. So it's either cold and wet or cold and wet. And we're getting temperatures 28, 30 degrees. Water temperatures are 28, 30 degrees. And the fish up there are really struggling. So all of these problems are amplified by climate change. So the graph that we've seen before, we've seen it several times throughout the course of the last 24 hours. But since the mid-1980s, and I do take your point into account that we can go back before the 1980s, but since the mid-1980s, we've gone from about 8 to 10 million salmon swimming around the whole Atlantic. So over to Russia in the east, Canada in the west, Spain in the south, Norway in the north. We're down to about 2 or 3 million. And this graph ended in 2015-16, and we've seen a continued decline there. And we can see the rivers, there's about 2,400 rivers in the database. And we can see that over half are either currently at risk or no longer have salmon. And again, it's simple graphs like this that hide a multitude of sins. Living and working in Scotland, and the Atlantic Salmon Trust covers the whole of the United Kingdom and Ireland, but living and working in Scotland, we had a start warning at the last conference I went to before the pandemic kicked in January 2019, and it was held at the Scottish Parliament. And the message from the government's senior scientist, the Scottish government's senior scientist, was really stark and unequivocal for Scotland. It's different in different parts of the world. But he said, if we don't act, we will lose salmon from Scotland in the next 20 to 30 years. So that's not about being on the endangered list. This is a real crisis that is coming towards us. We've heard a lot of the science over the last few days. We've heard of all the different factors that are impacting salmon. But I think it can be boiled down to what are the needs of salmon. And I think it's 3 things. I think it's cold water, it's clean water, and it's water. We forget that water is a precious resource. So what do I mean by these? Well, cold. We've heard that forests, riparian woodlands, help create shade and reduce water temperatures. We know that protecting wetlands, these upper reaches, the peat, if we can sequester carbon there, and it can help us achieve the ambitions and aspirations to maintain climate change at less than 1.5 degrees. That's a big, tall ask. We've also got clean. We've got a post-industrial legacy on a lot of these rivers. We've got redundant weirs and obstacles. We've got old historic levels of pollution that are still leaching out. And we're still getting unsustainable developments going on, where quite often salmon and rivers and the seas are an afterthought for the planning consideration. Okay, like we want to build this development, and we'll throw the conservationists a bone by doing a small amount of work. We need to stop that. We need to build in those mitigations right from the get-go, instead of being an afterthought. We've got aquaculture. It's been touched upon around the room today. But we need simple removal of parasites. We need to keep the farm fish on those farm sites. We need to stop them going out and causing the genetic damage for wherever they escape, because we're seeing it everywhere we look. We're seeing this genetic damage to wild fish populations. And we shouldn't have it. You know, we don't have oil rigs going aground and collapsing and breaking their moorings on a regular basis. Yet we have that with the salmon aquaculture industry. And we need to be able to stop that. These fish need to be able to have access to clean water, free of parasites. And we need to restore the river processes. The United Kingdom is a really small island. We're quite bolshy, but we're a small island with a lot of people on it. And we like to constrain our rivers. Instead of having a nice meandering river, we like to straighten it, put canal sides up, and manage nature. And we need to stop that. We need to restore these river road processes. So that's what I mean by clean. It's not just the water quality that's clean, but it's a natural river. We need to treat water as a precious resource. You know, if you live in the East End of London, the old joke is the water you're drinking has been through 7 sets of kidneys before it gets to your glass. I imagine it is completely different here. But we have to treat this water as our most precious resource. We need to get rid of our barriers. You know, we're losing the connectivity in our rivers. You know, as Phil said, as people are wanting to prevent flooding, they're building more barriers to hold back water. And yet we, as an industry, are trying to remove barriers so fish have access to the whole of their river. They need that water. And we need to reconnect our floodplains. At the moment, especially in the UK, we are really isolating our floodplains from the rivers. And we keep getting examples. Each of the 4 countries that make up the UK are always debating whether they should build houses on floodplains. You know, where's the sense? How can you build a house on a floodplain? It does exactly what it says on the tin. We know they flood. We know they're going to flood with greater regularity. So don't build there. Allow the river to do its natural process. So that's what I mean by cold, clean water. And so when you distill all of that science that we've heard down, these are the 3 things I think that we need. I don't really want to be gloomy with this talk, so I'm going to stop all the bad news. I'm going to start thinking about how we start fixing the problem and using salmon as the gauge and to work out, in Colin's words, how we're turning that dial. How are we making the improvements? What can salmon tell us? This is Glasgow in the 1950s, and it's the River Clyde that's running through it. And it's important because salmon are on the coat of arms. So the heraldic coat of arms for the city of Glasgow has 3 salmon on it. Yet when this photograph was taken, not only were there no salmon in the Clyde, there was pretty much no biological life in the Clyde. It was anoxic. It was poisoned beyond an inch of its life. And that's the way we were. And I think the last Salmon started to recover as people started to clean up the rivers in the mid-1980s. And this photo was taken last Thursday, on the Clyde. And it's important for a number of reasons. One, it shows if we put our minds to it, if we really care, we can get these fish back. We should not give up hope on these fish. We should be optimistic about their future. Second point is the kids in the background. They're the people that are really important in all of this. They're the future stewards of the Clyde and all the other industries, all the other rivers, as they become captains of industry, because they're a canny bunch, the Glaswegians. They go out and they do things and they go places. They know about salmon now. These are some of the first time that salmon have been seen in their river, and it's the first salmon they've seen that's not been a 200-gram fillet on the supermarket shelf somewhere. And it's reconnecting them with their river. And it also does something completely different. That fish and those kids, those children, get reconnected it connects Glasgow with Greenland. As we've seen those migration routes today, we know that these fish are going to be they're going to be heading over this way. They're going to be heading up to Norway, they're going to be heading to Iceland, they're going to be heading to Greenland. And that fish connects those children with communities right around the Atlantic. And that, it's worth its weight in gold, because it makes people care and will hopefully increase their willingness to pay to look after salmon in the future. So hopefully those changes can be tracked in the years to come. So we shouldn't give up hope on salmon. But I think it is entirely down to our choice. And I know you might be the choir, and I don't mean to preach to the choir, but it's the choice in here and the choices that society makes that determine whether salmon have any future on this planet. They have been around for millions of years. These are wild salmon on the east coast of Scotland that were photographed a couple of years ago. And so we still have good stocks. But if we want to see photos like this taken in the future, then we must act. So we've heard a lot of the science. We've got the likely suspects framework coming online, hopefully provide decision support tools. So as a non-scientist, what can I say here? Well, I think there are three things. I want people. I don't want just fisheries scientists or fisheries managers, but I think society as a whole needs to be really bold. You know, we know that trees need planting to restore riparian woodlands. You know, we don't need more research on what the impact's going to be on the thermal regime on a river. We need to get on with planting trees, and we need to do it at scale. We need people to be brave, especially the regulators. I don't know how many civil servants from governments are in the room, so I apologize now. But whenever I speak to a civil servant, 9 times out of 10, I always get the answer, well, we can do this. We've got this policy and we've got this process that we can put forward, and that will help salmon. But it's normally existing requirements that they're meeting for something else. And we need them to be brave and go from this is what we can do to this is what we need to do. So we need the regulation to stop these salmon farms breaking their moorings. It's not rocket science. We know how to do this. We know we can have that. We just need to get out there and not be scared of doing this. And we need to be brilliant. We really do need to be brilliant. And I think this pandemic, as horrendous as it has been, has shown us how brilliant humans can be. You know, within a few weeks of identifying this virus, the genome had been sequenced, the vaccine had been designed. It then took months to get out into trial and into all of our arms. But we've had the respirators being made by engineers. We've had the hand sanitizers that have gone from being somewhere obscure in the supermarket shelves to being commonplace, so that when you come to a conference like this, there's hand sanitizer on your table as you get round. We can be truly brilliant as a species, and we need to be. We really need to move the dial around, and we can use salmon for that. So why am I saying this, and why am I showing pictures of a lot of glass salmon when people normally show pictures of Atlantic salmon in their natural environment? And that's because I think we need to communicate this to the wider world. I think it's no longer acceptable to be preaching to the choir, to the people in this room, that salmon are important. We all know that salmon are important because we're dedicating our lives to it or we're supporting it, either with our efforts or with our finances. We know that. We need to get society to make these changes because at the moment, salmon conservation is in isolated communities. There's some really good work going on. Six Rivers Project, the restoration and the understanding of the work on the Froome, on the Laxford, on the Devon, there's the Clyde, the Mersey. There's all these success stories around. But these are all isolated communities, and we need to change that from being isolated to society. The whole of society needs to get behind this. Because what this fish is telling us is that if we have good, clean water, these fish will thrive, and we'll also thrive. So we just as I was getting on the flight to come here, we got the official notification that we're going to be in COP. So that horrible black and white photograph of that industrial nightmare that was Glasgow in the 1950s is going to be home to COP26, where people are going to be taking decisions about the future of our planet. And these people really need to be bold, brave, and brilliant. So we're taking an exhibition there of 200 to 300 life-size glass-blown salmon to try and illustrate and connect those delegates. Half of them won't even know what a salmon is, about why it's important. I think there's a key overriding message, and it came from the patron of the Atlantic Salmon Trust, Prince of Wales. There's a preamble. But when all is well with salmon, all is well with the world. And he meant that in the environmental context. So if salmon are thriving in our rivers and our oceans, it means that they're giving us a good, clear message that all is well with those rivers and those oceans. And it's good, wise words. And I think it cuts through the science. And that's what we need to do to be able to inspire people. None of this has happened on its own. So I just want to thank the people and the groups that have been involved. And we're taking Salmon School to COP. But it's not an Atlantic Salmon Project, Salmon Trust project. It's not a Missing Salmon Alliance project. It's bigger than the Atlantic because the people that are seeing the problems in the Atlantic, they're working with people in the Pacific, and they're seeing the same problems. So we're all coming together to join so we can give a very simple, clear message that these fish need cold, clean water and to inspire those delegates to be bold, brave, and brilliant. Thank you.